Hey guys, Jay here, welcome to EonsOfBattle.com. Today I have a very special video for you guys, our first ever prop tutorial. I'll be showing you how I made an almost full-scale replica of the Warhammer 40k Boltgun used by the Adeptes Astartes. First thing I'll be going through is a list of materials. First on the list is some Scotch tape. This I used to help me put together my blueprint. I just used standard paper for it and then taped it all together. I used a standard pencil for drafting it up, and to also help with drafting, I used plenty of different types of rulers. I found a 45 and a 90 ruler helped a lot in the process, but you could probably get away with just using a standard straight edge. Also, what I found helpful in the drafting process was a glue stick. I used a jumbo, and it helped with attaching the papers together. For the majority of this prop, I'll be carving it out of some 3-inch thick pink insulation foam that I had laying around, and I also used a little bit of a 1-inch thick piece. I also make sure to hold on to the cap from the Plastidip that I'm going to be using later. I found the cap to be a perfect size for the bolt gun barrel. The machine that I'm going to be using to do most of the cutting, although you could probably get away with using a key saw or a foam cutter, is a scroll saw. I found this a lovely tool and it helped a lot in the process. The two blades that I used for myself in my cutting of it out was a standard sized wood cutting saw blade and a very, very thin spiral blade. The spiral blade is amazingly helpful in this process because it means that you don't have to do any relief cuts whatsoever, because you can just change the direction of your cut and it'll move with it. I also used the internet, a standard X-Acto knife with a size 11 blade, just to help in the carving process, a box cutter, a disposable spray bottle for applying the Elmer's glue to seal it, a Sharpie, a little bit of wood glue to act as a fast-acting resin to help with the handle and some of the parts that are going to be bumped around a lot. Some paint retardant to help it achieve the chipping effect in the spray painting process. Plenty of Elmer's glue. I found myself using up 2 tubes of it, so make sure that you have plenty of it. Also, a material that you should have plenty of is painter's tape. I ended up using almost an entire roll. Make sure that you go with a cheaper painter's tape, because I found that the more expensive painter's tape tended to stick a lot better, and it's not that helpful for this process because you're always in constant fear of removing some of your previous paint layers. So just grab whatever's cheapest. Next on the list is some wall putty or wall spackling. Make sure that you're trying to get a spackling that's called soft the softer spackling, just because if you use a harder spackling or like Bondo, it's going to sand at a much slower rate than the foam, and you don't want that. Also, to aid in the process, I used some spray adhesive, just a general purpose. I got myself 2 cans of Plastidip, which is going to help between the sealing process of the Elmer's and the spray paint. Make sure that you get 2 different colors. I just found this incredibly helpful in telling where I had stopped the previous coat and applying the next coat. And then going on to the aerosol cans, I went with a gray paint. I ended up using a primer just because that's what I had available to me, but you just need a gray in general. You'll need a black primer. You'll need rust. I don't know if Krylon makes one, but I used Rust-Oleum's textured paint, the one that feels very, very sandy. I believe it comes in multiple different colors, but I just used the normal rust-colored one. I'm sure you can get away with any of them. You're going to need a gloss finish, or a clear gloss, some dark metallic paints, a matte finish or a matte clear coat, a chrome paint or something very, very, very bright metallic, unbridled enthusiasm, and the blessings of the Emperor. Moving on to the build stage of this prop, I drew myself up some blueprints. I ended up gluing together quite a few pages of printer paper, and I just drafted it out. Now, the plans that I've created here are actually going to be available for sale on our website if you want to go and download those and just move along with the process, or you can feel free to draw up your own. Here are also the blueprints that I used for my bolt pistol, which I created through the same processes, which will also be available on our website. So the first thing I did was I glued my plans down to the 3/4 inch or 3-inch foam board. I used the spray adhesive, making sure to spray it onto the paper and not the foam board because the acetone will melt away the foam board. So just spray it onto the paper and then lay it down. Then I used my scroll saw to cut out some of the larger pieces and cut away the excess foam. And then I moved from the thicker blade onto the spiral blade to help cut out a lot of the rounder cuts, like the inserts in the hand grip. Then I peeled off all of my plans. And then I moved on to the widening, the hand grip, and the upper receiver of the bolt gun. So I took a second copy of my blueprints and I glued them down to the 1-inch thick foam board, and I cut those out as well. I glued them on top of the bolter using some hot melt glue, making sure to glue the hot melt glue in the middle of where the two ends meet, because the hot glue will melt the foam board, and so you don't want to end up with some foam, some holes in the foam where you're working. Then I began shaping the bolter using a combination of my hobby knives and some 60 grit sandpaper. Now be a little bit careful with the 60 grit sandpaper that you don't end up tearing. If you ever find that you're actually tearing up the foam, I would switch to a lighter grit sandpaper. As I moved along with the process, I began gluing some of the components together. I was using a combination of hot melt glue to quickly glue it in place, and Elmer's glue, which glued over time and created a stronger bond. Also, to help with keeping things together and keeping them from slipping and sliding, I added toothpicks to help hold everything in place. I began adding some wall spackling to help fix any holes or imperfections that I was finding in the foam. This is going to be a pretty laborious process, but it is necessary to create a very, very smooth finish. Once I had the handle shaped how I wanted it to be, I went to my blueprints and I took measurements of the two little finger reliefs that are in the foregrip. And so I used a Sharpie and I made myself two plans. I cut them out, and what you could do is you could just either fill that in with wall putty, or you could actually make yourself some new inserts out of foam and slide them in place. Or you could forgo that process altogether, but I really, really wanted this to be fairly accurate, so I went ahead and did that. To create the magazine, I took the piece of foam that I used for the magazines, I cut out the two small tongues in the magazine, I slid those out, and I took some 60 grit sandpaper and I planed it down to 2 or 3/4 inch, and then I slid the tongues back in and glued them in place. Then I continued the process of trying to seal any cracks in the foam, or any places where the foam met foam, with the wall putty. And then also to help hold things in place while things were drying, just to keep things from sliding around or moving, I used sewing needles, which I liked because they were very, very long, but they didn't leave any real impression in the foam, so you can just slide them in and they held things in place nicely. And so I added quite a few coats of the wall putty, and this also helped to smooth it out. And then I continued the process of just filling in and fixing any nook and cranny that I found. I worked in sections, almost cutting the bolter into like 8 parts, and then just working very, very carefully to fill in every single spot, every single crack in the bolter, and trying to get some wall putty in all of the nooks and crannies in the hand grip. It was a pretty tough process, but in the end, it makes the painting process that much easier. On the barrel of the bolt gun, I used the cap to the Plastidip that I'm going to be using later, and I just carefully with my hobby knife or in some scissors, I cut out 2 circles and then I just hot glued it in place. And then I used some Elmer's glue and I began adding some layers of Elmer's glue, painting it onto the handle, the bottom of the magazine, and the foregrip. This acts as almost a resin. It dries very, very hard, and the more coats you add, the sturdier it is. You could add them to the entirety of the model, but I didn't find that I needed to, so I just stuck to the areas that were going to be under the most stress. Then I took some 100 grit sandpaper and I just began sanding all of the areas smooth and making sure to make sure that the whole thing was flush. I ended up adding probably 25 or 30 coats of wood glue to the handle just to make it sure that it was the sturdiest area on the gun. I ended up taking off a little bit too much foam on my handle, and so I had to kind of fix that with the wood glue, but if you follow the pattern, you shouldn't have a problem. For the more decorative pieces, like the 2 little circular pieces or the rivets that are on the gun, I cut them out of some foam with my scroll saw, and then I just fixed them up with a little bit of sandpaper. Then I trimmed them to about 3/4 inch. I found I messed up a few times, and so it helped to have a large piece to work from. I sanded the edges to make them a little bit rounder, and then I glued them down with some Elmer's glue. To create the Aquila, which is going to be my decorative piece to go on the end of the upper receiver, I simply drew out half an Aquila and then used a tracing light box, or you could even just put it up to a window, and I copied it onto the other side. I took that and I glued it down to some fun foam, and then I just carefully cut it out with my hobby knife, and then I used some Elmer's glue and some sewing needles to hold it in place while it dried. Here are the sheets that I cut them out of. As you can see, I've glued them down using the same process of applying the glue just to the paper and not to the foam. And then to glue it to the bolt gun, I just covered the entire backing with Elmer's glue and I glued it in place, moved it to where I want it to be, and then stuck it down with some push pins and left it for about a day to dry. Then going back to the bolter, I made sure that, working on the rivets, I planed them down to about 1/4 of an inch tall, and then I rounded the edges using some sandpaper, and then I took a hobby file to make the flathead marks in them. Then I took the entire bolter, hung it from the ceiling, and applied dozens and dozens of coats of watered down Elmer's glue through the spray bottle. And then finally, finishing it off with a paint stage, I took it off of the hanger, and then I waited about 24 hours for the last coat of Elmer's to dry, and then just let everything settle and finish drying. And then I applied 2 full cans of Plastidip. This is where the 2 different colors came in handy, because where I could see where I left off with the previous coat, and so that way I got a very, very even coat all over the surface, all over the gun. And this process was pretty much just to seal in the foam for good. Then I moved on to painting specifically the upper receiver, and I started off by dusting on a coat of the dark metallic, and then dusting on a coat of the chrome, making sure to leave a little bit of the previous color showing, but making sure that some areas were very, very bright with the chrome. I then taped off some areas for battle damage. I did 3 slashes, almost like a Tyranid slash, and I picked out plenty of areas with my paint retardant, which I picked off with a brush. Now the paint retardant worked really, really well for stopping these areas from having the paint attached to them. And then I painted on a coat of black paint, and then I dusted on a little bit of gray paint, and then I once again dusted on a coat of the black paint, leaving just a little bit of the gray showing. And then I took a paper towel and I wiped away all of the paint retardant once those previous coats had dried, and this removed the upper coats beautifully, leaving the very, very large cartoony scratches behind. Then I also found that I needed to wash the bolt gun at this point, removing all of the paint retardant that had been applied already, because it will actually not dry, or it'll take a very, very long time, and so you're going to want to actually use water to wash it off, and then allow that to dry. Then I took my painter's tape and I taped off the entire upper receiver, and then I applied my first coat, or a heavy coat, of the Rust-Oleum texture paint, and then my black primer, and then I dusted on a layer of black, and then I sprayed on a heavy coat of metallic, or my dark metallic paint, and then I dusted on a little bit of my chrome paint, leaving a little bit of the dark metallic showing underneath, but mostly substituting it with the chrome. And then I stood a few feet away from the bolter and I dusted on the dark metallic again to tone everything back down. Then I removed all of my tape, and then I had the bolter almost finished, and so at this point I took a hobby metallic that was brighter than the metallic that I had used before, and I did a little bit of dry brushing on the hand grip and some of the areas of the metallic on the bolt gun. And then this step would be a little bit optional, but then I also took a brown paint and I stippled it on here and there to add a little bit of rust effect. Then finally, to finish off the bolter, I taped off the Aquila, and which would be another optional step. I taped off the Aquila, and I did the same steps that I did to the hand grip and the rest of the gun onto the Aquila, using my texture paints and then the metallics. And then I finished the entire bolt gun off by sealing it with a heavy coat of clear gloss, and a heavy coat of clear matte finish. Once that was dry, I had a finished bolt gun. It was a very, very labor-intensive process to finish, but really it wasn't that expensive a process when you take into account the actual size of this prop when it was finished. I'm very, very happy with the results. It is very, very accurate to the actual miniature model. I think that the whole thing turned out fabulously. It is very, very fun to hold in the hand. It's a lovely size, and I am very, very satisfied with this project. It was a lot of fun to do. If you have any other ideas or techniques you'd like to see us do, please leave in the comments below. If you'd like to see more videos, you can visit us at our website at EonsOfBattle.com. I hope you found this tutorial very helpful. Thanks for watching.